I want to welcome you all for being here. My name is Laura Herr. I'm the Senior Director of Development and Alumni Engagement for the Tepper School of Business. I'm going to give you a few very quick opening instructions, a couple of updates, and then we're going to dive right into things. So in terms of opening instructions, this webinar is being recorded. We will have the link posted to our website following, so it will be accessible to all there. We will also have time at the end of the panel conversation for some questions. So if you would like to take advantage of using the Q&A box throughout, please do so. I will be monitoring that, as will the panelists, so we will be able to address as many of those questions as possible. Now, a couple of updates for you all while I have you as a captive audience. We are in the year of ones and sixes, if you were not aware. So our Tepper School Masters Reunion is coming April 30th, May 1st and 2nd. Your eyes did not deceive you. There are 3 days of programming this year. We have a special celebratory event on April 30th, especially for our 50th reunion class. If you want more information, see the QR code. Also visit our website. We're very excited to have you here. Also, continuing celebrations in the spring, of course, our Tepper undergrads, April 9th through 11th for Carnival. We look forward to having you here for Buggy, Pints with Profs, and celebrating with you for the spring. Other things a little bit closer into the future. We have Giving CMU Day on December 2nd. On this National Day of Giving, we are going to do our own little slice of this here at Carnegie Mellon and the Tepper School of Business. Truth be told, I'm a very competitive person, and from what I understand, Tepper has traditionally beaten all of the other colleges on campus when it comes to alumni participation. So I very much welcome and invite your support during Giving CMU Day, because, Tepper's the best, so what are we going to do? Moving on a little bit around the corner, you're going to enjoy today's webinar. I want to let you know about an upcoming webinar we will have after this, which will be on December 11th, featuring our own Professor Lawrence Allis, Tepper School of Business, Professor of Economics, and Jack O'Malley, Senior Vice President and Managing Director at PNC Capital Markets, for a very engaging conversation about tariffs and the shifting economy and what business leaders need to know. So do keep that in mind. We look forward to sending you more information about that. So it is time. Melissa Horne, I am very pleased to welcome you and introduce you to very briefly to our audience here. Melissa is a member of our alumni board. She is an ambassador and advocate of the Tepper School of Business. I am so thrilled to have her on our board. She's been an very integral part of our Collaboration and Advancement Committee, which has played a heavy hand in building this webinar for you today. Melissa is a vice president at Fidelity Investment, and she is just a rock star. Melissa, I'm going to kick it over to you and let you take things away.
Laura, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. On behalf of the Tepper Alumni Board and the Collaboration and Advancement Committee, I'd like to welcome all of the alumni, parents, students, and faculty joining us today to hear from our esteemed panelists. Before we begin, I invite each panelist to introduce themselves and give a brief overview about their current work and connection to women-led ventures. Let's start with Candice.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation. This is a conversation that is near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to getting into everyone's questions. As Melissa mentioned, my name is Candice Morgan, and I graduated from Dietrich College when it was HNSS, but I minored in business, and my entire career has really spanned both business and psychology and industrial organizational psychology. I spent the last 10 years in tech and venture capital, and I've really focused on how we get more entrepreneurs and more tech leaders that are women and those of other backgrounds that are underrepresented. I'm also the co-founder of an angel investing collective called Bag Collective, which we started when I moved to Google Ventures, and now has about 400 members. And the goal really there is to teach folks that are underrepresented in terms of angel checks to invest in the asset class. We have a portfolio of about 50 companies now. So really near and dear to my heart in this topic. I personally angel invest. One of my favorite areas is women's health, but looking forward to getting to more.
Candice, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear from you. Next, I would love to have Evan go ahead and introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone, and it's an honor to be here. I am a Tepper grad from a few moons ago, actually undergrad and grad in 1983. I've had a wonderful career. First 20 years, I took a small family business and grew it into a global business with a very successful exit in the Pittsburgh area. Then I moved on and became the chief financial officer at the U.S. Department of Agriculture under President Obama, and Tom Vilsack, who was a secretary who was originally from Pittsburgh, Squirrel Hill to be exact. And then the last 15 years, I've spent a lot of time in impact investing, philanthropy, and advocacy. We focus heavily in our family office, which is led by my daughter and nephew, in terms of focusing on investing in women fund managers and direct investments. So we're invested in about 50 funds, all but two are founded by women, and about, like I said, 200 directs. And we are actively engaged in supporting platforming and highlighting successful women fund managers, and working with other LPs who invest across emerging managers to help support the network.
Evan, thank you so much for joining our conversation today. I'm very excited to hear more about what you have to share. And finally, I'll introduce Maryam I'd like to invite Maryam to introduce herself. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. And really excited to be here. Love hearing about the work that Candice and Evan have been doing, and excited to share a little bit about my journey. So I graduated in 2007, at the time HNSS, now Dietrich. And if I told you that at that time I had aspirations to be in the venture capital industry, I would absolutely be lying to you. I had no idea sort of what the world of venture looked like. And I got this great opportunity to move out to San Francisco and start working at a venture capital database product called Venture Source. It doesn't actually exist anymore, but at the time it was sort of the pitch book of the day. And so I got really immersed into the venture capital world through that lane. Got to learn sort of all the ins and outs of deals and exits and people, and kind of how the venture industry works. And it didn't take long for me to realize that there's a lot of similar things happening in terms of like the same names, the same sort of backgrounds, the sort of concentration of where a lot of the funding is going. And I was still very early in my career, and I was, kind of had this recognition, but wasn't really sure, what my role could be in perhaps addressing some of that. So had some other opportunities to lead research and do different work on private markets and venture capital, both in the US and outside the US. But then 10 years ago, had this opportunity to start up and really get something off the ground called Venture Forward, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that is focused on really addressing the fact that despite how impactful, how much wealth and innovation the venture ecosystem has created over the past 50 plus years, it's not been one that's been accessible and inclusive. And the opportunity and access to venture, whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur, has just not been available. And like our goal at Venture Forward is to really help break some of those barriers, increase access, and really just democratize venture for the broader country, and not just the few demographics that have been able to reap the benefits of this really transformative ecosystem. So that's what I do now. I'm the executive director at this organization called Venture Forward, and I'm really excited to get into today's conversation with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm excited to dive into our conversation a little bit deeper now that we know more about you and your backgrounds. The first thing that we want to explore is the challenges and opportunities for women entrepreneurs. So I have a question for all of the panelists in no particular order. I'd love to hear, where do women founders face the most friction in the venture capital cycle?
Sure, I'm happy to start. First of all, I wanted to say that I share many sentiments with Evan and Maryam. And in fact, I get to work with Maryam on the board of Venture Forward. So we talk about these issues all the time. And even if you are an entrepreneur, let's say of any background, and you need three things to figure out how to build your business, right? You need to understand how to raise capital and who to seek for the capital that you're looking to build. You need to understand how to build a business, find your product market fit. You need coaches for that. You need the right networks to introduce you to potential funders, and you need capital, of course. And so usually, if you're an entrepreneur, the first thing you're going to do is, as you're building your business and you have your idea, is raise this friends and family round. It's literally called the friends and family round. And so you have to rely on your own local network to build that initial capital, to build out your proof of concept, maybe hire your first, CTO or engineer or, whatever you're building. You have to build your board of advisors or your personal advisors around you, but that relies on money. And we do know that of all the venture capital funding that gets distributed, only about 2% of that goes to women-only led teams. So the barrier starts right there at the very beginning of like, who can I ask around me, or where can I use my own wealth, which is usually, beget by things like home ownership or generational wealth or retirement or, these or entrepreneurship, right? To get that initial capital. So I think it starts from the very beginning, and then relationships to the right funders then prolong that gap.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with everything Candice said. I would also add, and there's a great study, it's called How Venture Capitalists Makes Decisions. And I think just kind of understanding a little bit of like the venture life cycle is helpful context, because where venture investors sit, they are raising capital from what are known as limited partners. Those are endowments, foundations, family offices like Evans. But these are all, allocators that, generally have a fiduciary duty to, their stakeholders, and they are looking to sort of venture in their portfolio as a way to drive alpha. So these are financially driven investors that are investing into venture capital funds. And the venture capital investors are then deploying that capital into portfolio companies. And the reason why I mentioned that study is I think it's pretty eye-opening in terms of just how network driven this industry is. And it's really about who you know, warm introductions. And as much as we all probably hate the fact that that is the fabric of this industry, it's just, I think, how it works. And it's above my pay grade, I guess, in terms of like being able to maybe change that. But the stat I think that's important to know here is if you kind of think about where VC investors are, where their lead generation is coming from, 30% of their deals come from their former colleagues or work acquaintances. Another 20% of deal comes from referrals by people they know. Another 8% is from their existing portfolio companies. So that's almost 60% of like just deals that are getting done are through people's existing networks. And so if you don't sort of fall into that network, and whether that's, where you went to school, maybe communities that you're involved in, it's really hard to sort of just get a cold email or a cold pitch out to someone. And just kind of knowing the odds that are sort of stacked against you. Again, the study, it does a really good job of evaluating this, but of 100 deals that maybe a VC investor looks at, they only invest in one. And so I think the real sort of friction that comes into play here is it is a really difficult task to raise capital, whether you're an entrepreneur, or if you're fund manager trying to raise capital for your fund. It's really difficult. And so for all the other reasons I just mentioned, when it comes to sort of the network and relationships. And so I think trying to find an edge somehow through your network is just so key in trying to sift through the noise of all the other founders out there trying to raise capital at the same time.
And again, agreeing with Candice and Maryam in terms of the points they highlighted. I'd like to focus on we've been talking about the systemic bias in raising money, and you see this all the time. And I was speaking at a conference yesterday, and one of the companies I saw a couple weeks ago is called Zella. And they use menstrual fluid to diagnose a frame of reproductive issues, including endometriosis. And several men in the room are like, "What's that?" And again, it just highlighted the point that there are a ton of market opportunities that the systemic bias of these funders hold back those kind of interesting entrepreneurs who have kind of breakthrough opportunities. People often ask me, why do we focus and invest in women? And, my first response is really, I'm sorry you have to ask that question. But given that you had to ask the question, then, what I say is women will outperform men qualitatively and quantitatively, but you do you. And so we've had this opportunity to get to know this incredible network of emerging managers. And like I said, primarily women fund managers. And for family offices, that becomes important because they're the ones that have the domain expertise and really are able to identify those companies that they want to bring into their portfolio, not because of just the things that the edge, the kind of unique things that Candice talked about, but also their ability to now open up their network. And this is where it becomes fascinating because typically men have very much of a zero-sum mindset. They don't want to share information. They view information as power, and therefore they want to hoard it. In contrast, particularly in these networks, the women are always like, if you like me, I'd love to introduce you to my friend who's got a fund, or and the idea sharing and the collaboration is not only wonderful but really enhances the effectiveness of the fund managers, and that's why you see them kind of breaking out. The last thing I would add, the big challenge, Melissa, really starts to become in terms of track record. So a lot of people want, where's their track record? And again, understanding the systemic bias that have held people back, it's hard to, often look at track record per se, but you're looking at where they're involved, where they're engaged. And I'll just give you one anecdote. So Alana Diamond is the managing director of the 412 Venture Fund that I'm a GP and founder of. Alana spent 20, 25 years leading as a CEO of a consumer products company, and then 15 years at Innovation Works, founding Alpha Lab. We were discussing an investment by the state of Pennsylvania who said that they didn't want to invest in first-time fund managers and that Alana technically fit what was a first-time fund manager, kind of disregarding her 30 to 40 years of experience. And again, it's if you're going to look at labels, then you perpetuate the bias. And so what we've got to do, and we'll get to later in the conversation, what are ways to kind of break through that structural and systemic bias to open up opportunities, not because for the sake of opportunities, but because they're smart investments.
Thank you all for sharing your insights here. From what I've heard, network is critical when you're a founder, making sure you have the right network in place. Cold calling or cold reaching out is going to be really difficult to get your foot in the door, and that's one of the most important things. And certainly we're expected as women to come in with a track record where that's going to be hard if you're starting out. One follow-up question, are there any other structural barriers that you've seen, Candice, and how can founders counteract any bias?
Yeah, there are. And, I think it's really interesting to note that, a lot of these barriers might be subconscious, right? However, they still have a broad impact, right? So, for example, I mentioned there, and the entire panel has mentioned, right? There are three things you need: information on how to start a company, the right relationships and networks, and literal cold hard cash capital, to build your company. And I think that bias can show up at every stage. So, for example, on the who you know side, I mean, research shows that women are twice as likely to back another woman because there are more women in their networks. And to Evan's point, some of the issues. I mean, I'm an angel investor in a company that's focused on perimenopause. I'm an angel investor in a company that's focused on polycystic ovarian syndrome. I'm an angel investor in a company focused on maternal mental health, or maternal physical health, and AI and some of the networks in smaller and medium clinics. And so understanding these types of problems and the total addressable market to these types of problems, right? That information, and investors understanding that. And, I think, again, Evan already spoke to this. That is going to create a barrier if the investor is like, what is this issue? How big is this issue? How serious is this issue? I mean, I've even sat in an investment committee, and had, a kind of a male partner say, hey, okay, my wife went through this thing. I get it now, right? And it's just the exposure to the understanding of these types of issues. And we know, for example, on the life sciences side of things, the types of cancers, for example, where people are creating amazing innovations in drugs that can extend and counteract some of the effects of these things. We tend to see lowest funding in a lot of cancers that are more prevalent in women, I would say, maybe with the exception of breast cancer. So that's that knowledge piece and that barrier of just the investor understanding the scope of the problem. is one issue. I would say another structural barrier that is often subconscious is even in the pitch process itself. If you there's been some research, it's inconclusive, but that's found that women founders tend to get more kind of how are you mitigating risk type questions. And men founders tend to get more like potential of growth and like idea questions. And that research, again, it's not, this is not 100% blanket statement, but even subtle changes in the types of questions you get for, let's say if you're an investor in an entrepreneur you believe in, right? That can really impact, who gets the deal. And then you, even at the end, let's say you get the deal, understanding the types of terms of ownership and how much you own on your cap table, the percentage of your company, all of that math. Because I really think, when I came into venture, I was like, okay, wait, I want to see more entrepreneurs from different backgrounds. And catalyzed, my first year at Google Ventures, we doubled the amount of funding to women founders, but understanding then who owns that, that cap table money and who, the ownership gap in equity, that's an even bigger opportunity for women. So anyway, these are a few examples. Research does also show that even though I mentioned that 2% of venture dollars go to, all women-led companies, once you add, if there's a male co-founder, that percentage shoots up to about 20% of funding. And again, I don't think that's a conscious gap. I think that having that male co-founder means a broader set of networks and a broader set of conversations organically, but it does create a barrier.
Wow, thanks for sharing all of that. I'm learning so much. Now that we've talked a little bit about the challenges for women entrepreneurs, we'd like to pivot and start to learn how we can help build inclusive ecosystems here. So another question for all of you, how can Temper alumni strengthen the capital ecosystem, and what roles can we play?
I'm happy to start. So, I think there are a couple of different things that that sort of come to mind, in that, being a founder, it's really lonely. I think it's a long journey. It's the power law in venture is it's real. It's, the success is or failure is the rule. Success is the exception. Like, that's just sort of how the venture industry works. And so kind of, with the tall order of, Candice sort of mentioned, there's like the huge financial risk that comes with starting your own company. There's the, unknown, there's the trying to raise capital and build a company, et cetera. And I think some of the areas where we make sure, like, we don't want to forget about is there are so many people that can support those founders on that journey. And that doesn't necessarily have to be people that are, specific to that sector or that the technology that founder is trying to build. But I think there are a lot of ways that, allies can support those founders, even in just making connections with potential investors, supporting on getting customers, being board members. The board plays such a critical role for some of for these startups, as they're young. A lot of founders maybe don't have all the tools in their toolkit to be, a CEO and understand everything that comes with managing a company. Like, they might have a very technical driven mindset, but then you kind of need to figure out, well, how do I hire for my finance team, and hire like an HR team, et cetera, operations. And so there's so much that goes to supporting those founders, whether it's being a informal mentor, formal mentor, someone who can be a board member. And then, to Candice's point earlier around sort of the friends and family, even if you're not a venture investor, which that is in and of itself like a much more sophisticated asset, or it's becoming a much more sophisticated asset class. There's so much other capital and sort of the capital stack that comes even earlier, whether that's through angel investing or even doing other types of accelerator type programs. So I think there's just a lot of different roles that the ecosystem people in the Tepper ecosystem can play, even if it's not, even if your goal is not necessarily to raise to start your own company or to raise your own venture fund, but to be part of this great industry.
I think what I would kind of add to that, and thank you, Mary, that's been great, Marianne, in terms of identifying those mentorship roles. Because what that also does is provides trust to potential investors that it's not just the entrepreneur, but they've got a group of people and advisors behind them with established track records that can support what they're doing. I think it's also important to understand that there's a lot of great businesses, and they all don't fit this model of what we think of as traditional venture capital. That is, someone's going to have a fund, they're going to have, looking for home runs. One company's going to make all the returns, a bunch of them are going to fail. And so what it drives is this behavior of looking for someone that can scale and is going to like be a home run. Well, I've spent 20 years building a small business, adding, 20, 30, 40 jobs a year. We had a crazy successful exit, but it was patient capital over time. And so part of the advice that we can provide with people is that, rushing into venture and raising a whole lot of money at once isn't always the smartest thing to do. You want to not only have that edge, but prove the product market fit, prove there are paying customers, and be thoughtful because once you start raising money, you have dilution issues that Candice was talking about. And so you want to look at non-dilutive areas for potential growth and funding that advisors can open you up to. So at least in previous administrations, there were government grants, NIH and SBIRs, et cetera, which are kind of important funders. But there's also this very important growing field right now, which is using this idea of, it's called either regenerative philanthropy or evergreen philanthropy. And I know because we do a lot of philanthropic work, and I'm always looking for hybrid solutions. When I meet someone who's got a great idea, the world needs it, it doesn't fit the venture capital model. And simply put, the venture philanthropy is taking the endowment money of a foundation, and instead of investing it in the market, you can invest in companies, in directs, you can invest in LPs, in emerging manager funds. And then the funds, when there is an exit, come back to that nonprofit. So you're giving potential investors the ability to invest with their regular investment dollars or any kind of foundation or nonprofit dollars. And what it does then is becomes more patient capital. They don't have to, drive these DPI and MOIC kind of metrics and get out there and raise money and then their next fund. And it becomes this just like high anxiety growth for the fund managers and pushing slow, thoughtful, intelligent growth might be the best way to kind of approach some of these opportunities. And again, I appreciate in a world driven by the speed of how artificial intelligence is impacting literally every single business, you also want to be thoughtful about what is right for you and your company. And so I think that we as a community can provide that type of, advice and that wisdom that they don't need to kind of jump on the fast track that's going to end up in a place that they're not happy with. Because there's lots and lots of stories founders who started companies and ended up with very little at the end of it, but someone else made a lot of money off them. And we look to someone like Taylor Swift, who taught musicians how to make money and not give it all to the record companies. Another great example of a woman teaching people how to do things right.
Thanks, Evan and Maryam. Candice, anything to add there?
The only thing I would add, which builds on what Maryam and Evan have already shared, is even if you don't have a substantial amount of capital to give financially, for example, angel investors, to be an accredited angel investor, there are certain salary or net worth expectations, which supposedly are a proxy to understanding how risky the asset class is. But it's, I think a bit arbitrary. That's another conversation. I would say that you can, as a consumer, or for example, buy products by, women-led companies that you admire and that you need. You can, source just as you might source ethical, clothing or, things that are environmentally friendly. Like take a look at like kind of, for example, even smaller like women-owned businesses or other minority-owned businesses as a consumer. The other thing that is free, but is time. I mean, time is money, et cetera. But you can offer your time and your guidance. For example, I was a people leader at Pinterest for many years and, saw us go through IPO, et cetera. I'm now in the last month, I have talked to three different entrepreneurs that I met back at Pinterest that are building incredible products. And some of them are, B2B products, and some of them are direct to consumer products. But, I'm in some cases putting in angel investment checks, in other cases helping with people issues. There was a founder that I met in my time at Google who, was building her company and needed some, scaling management and dealing with team issues. And so I spent hours with her focused on that. So just remember that you can contribute in a lot of different ways.
The other thing I might add, Melissa, is that there are ways to become and support these companies that don't require a lot of capital. So there are platforms. So there's a Pittsburgh-based company called Honeycomb Credit that provides debt financing for small businesses. There's also WeFunder, and there's a number of other, but those are two that I know well that do not require a lot of capital, but give you a chance to kind of dip your toe in the water, start to learn, kind of get a feel for it. And then, then you can move on. There's 99 Tartans, which is a fund for CMU kind of alumni. And so there's different ways to approach this. It doesn't have, I tell people, if you donate $1, you're a philanthropist. You don't have to be Andrew Carnegie, be a philanthropist. All of us, and probably I will tell you, the most important thing that you can give is what Candice said, which is your time.
Wonderful. Thank you all for all of these insights. So it sounds like we can give money by way of investing. We can give time by way of volunteering, mentoring, advising, acting as a board member. So there's a lot of different ways we as alumni can contribute to this community and this ecosystem. That's amazing. Follow-up question for you, Evan. How do you balance your mission and returns in a venture capital backed venture?
So, I will start, I spent a lot of time early on with Kiva and helped Kiva come to the US. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Kiva is a crowdfunding platform that uses microfinance to support small businesses around the world. And then we did the first full-scale pilot in Pittsburgh, which has been and continues to be a big success. And one of the things I learned from that is that women pay back and are much more reliable than males that borrow money. Kind of, a very interesting kind of takeaway in terms of that aspect of it. And so when one of the funds we're invested in is called Halogen Ventures, and Jesse Draper of the Draper family. And Jesse has written articles and talked about the idea that investing women is not an effing charity. And the point is that when I hear people say, think of women or emerging manager or diverse, they immediately want to apply a market discount, as if people in those spaces can't earn above market returns, which I take great umbrage to. And so, sometimes if you're in a room, you just need to call people out. And, when you start hearing that kind of language and that kind of approach, I mean, it is just wrong and the facts don't support it. And for us personally, we also look at, again, some of these returns will take time because of the vintages you're in. And so what you want to see is, how do you see these people kind of engaging with you and your team? How do you see them collaborating with other fund managers? And how do you see them not generally like, oh, they help with strategy or help with leadership or whatever, but it's what are you actually doing to help these companies get through tough and challenging times? And sometimes it's as simple as an introduction. And let me just give one example now. So we're invested in addition to Honeycomb Credit, something called I Fund Women, which has helped over 400,000 small female-led businesses in the US. With all the language backlash from this current administration, they hit some real big headwinds, and we're kind of struggling. We made an introduction to Honeycomb. It was just, hey, you two people, I think you have something in common. And Honeycomb and essentially merged with I Fund Women to ensure that organization that provided not just capital, but training and support and mentoring for small women business owners was able to continue its mission. And so I think that, one of the best things in terms of us is looking at not just the financial returns, which we care about and we expect, above market returns. But we also want to see what's the impact that they're having in the fields that they're making a difference in people's lives.
And I know we just in the interest of time, I'll just quickly double click on Evan's point because this is one of the biggest persistent myths that like there will literally be funds or like even limited partners that'll be like, hey, I invested in my one woman fund manager for the year or et cetera. The way you double investments, for example, in women entrepreneurs isn't by giving money to companies that haven't gone through an extremely rigorous process and been determined to be scalable and profitable. It's by purposely expanding the deal flow that you're seeing and choosing the very best winners from that. And investing is really about finding the edge, like, right? It's about finding places other people aren't investing that could have outsized impact. And we know that this is one of the underinvested communities.
Thanks, Candice. Thanks, Evan. I had one more question for Maryam before we move on to our next and final theme. What strategies have you seen that have worked best for women scaling their ventures as you work at Venture Forward?
Yeah, I would say, just building your network. I can't underscore that enough. And it's hard because not everyone is an extrovert. And it's, if that's not what you're like to do, and it's taxing, it takes time. But I do think just sort of continuing to build your network can really help in the long run. I also think, and kind of going back to something I mentioned earlier, which is kind of finding those allies, those mentors, those champions. And I don't necessarily mean people who are just going to be cheerleading you the whole way, but folks that you feel comfortable sort of asking difficult questions or kind of getting pushback on, or sort of taking their advice, valuing their advice, because they have perspectives to bring that could help shape your pitch or help shape how you're approaching fundraising, or just one of the hundreds of different challenges you're going to face as a hurdle being a founder or CEO. And so, I think kind of just surrounding yourself with people that you trust and who can help shape your company. I also think that there's a lot of science and sort of the technical finance part of venture capital, but there's so much of like the art behind venture capital. And I think the art you kind of pick up as you go, you have more conversations, you learn. But I do think that founders who take the time to sort of understand the science and the technical aspect of venture, it really can help sort of build the confidence when you're talking to investors. And what I mean by that is going back to something I said earlier, which is like really just kind of taking the time to understand, like, how does the venture fund life cycle work? How does this ecosystem work? Like, what are the motivations for the different stakeholders that you are either interacting with or that are somehow connected to an investment? But kind of understanding there are different types of funds out there. Like venture is, I don't even know if you say like venture capital anymore, like what that means. A lot of ventures starting to look like private equity. There's sort of the true, sort of more traditional early stage venture. So there's all these different flavors of venture funds out there. And I think it's hard to get lost in the noise of all of that. So I think kind of staying true to like identifying, what is the subset of investors that really, are investing in your sector, in your stage, sort of taking the time to, again, sort of figure out a little bit more of like the front loading stuff that you can do versus the stuff that you can't control, that you're going to have to just figure out as you go. But I think spending some time to do that, also just sort of understanding like how do term sheets work, and what do pro rata rights mean, and how do cap tables work, just things like that. I think for founders, just taking the time to sort of learn more about that, I think, like I said, builds confidence and just kind of makes you smarter in terms of like what you're trying to build. And if you're, this is a long-term asset class and it's going to take years for you to build this company, like, are you sort of setting yourself up for success from the beginning? So those are a couple of things I think can help with just sort of setting the good foundation for founders.
Thanks. Now that we've talked a little bit about the current landscape and how we can help, I'd like to look forward towards the future. What trends do you see shaping the next decade of women's entrepreneurship? I'll start with Candice.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think there are several really fascinating trends. But of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about AI. That's where everybody is focused right now. But particularly some of the application layers of AI, all right? And so, for example, there are a lot of incredible like HR tech companies right now that are using AI, whether it's understanding employee sentiment or HR tooling. I was an angel investor in a company that was focused on bias in software engineering interviews and leveraging AI to create a more objective interview process. And so I think that's one, example of application. For me personally, I think mental health. I think there are a lot of amazing ways to scale. There's a founder I met with yesterday who is focused on using AI in voice-related AI journaling to really help people build better relationships, right? And so there are these really exciting like applications to AI. But outside of that, I mentioned I'm really avid around women's health, and I think there are just some incredible health tech companies in general that are extremely exciting. Some of them are focused on really meeting people where they are in their communities, people that are suffering with issues, for example, with severe mental illness or addiction. And, there are companies that are working to make sure that people get better payer provider benefits or brought into the medical system early when they need help and, can work in that way. So I mean, I can go in a lot of different directions here, but I'm very excited around, some of these potential applications.
I take it rather than maybe diving in on specific sectors, I'm going to take a slightly different view on this, which is, uh, in today's ecosystem, about 20% of investors who are check writers are women. About 10 years ago, it was like half of that. And because it's such a like sort of long life cycle for venture, it takes 10 years for you to know if you're going to be successful at all. And so I think what I'm sort of excited about or optimistic about is, the funds that Evan's been funding over the past few years, like all of these women check writers who still might be sort of early in their venture careers, but I think it's going to translate to some really blockbuster, like transformational exits of not only generating very good returns for investors, but to Candice's point, I think just kind of addressing some of the blind spots in different sectors that just haven't been addressed because the same capital, a lot of the capital has been going to funding the same types of companies. And so I think kind of just broadening the aperture of investing through the lens of more female check writers. I'm really excited to sort of see what that looks like over the next 10 years.
I think one of the things I kind of frame this as if you think about kind of women are the CEO of the household. So in addition to their job, many, whether they are stay at home, which by the way, someone who is raising their kids is a full-time job. Let's just be clear about that. But, the task, the responsibilities of running the household typically fall on a woman. And so what that does is bring them front and center to childcare issues, health issues, both physical and mental for their children, any family issues around that, as well as for aging parents or grandparents and all the issues around senior care, elder care, and all the things that. And so, what it does is when fund managers are in this space and investors understand these real problems that people deal with, then what it does is you see dollars starting to flow into those opportunities. And so, as an example, if you have and you're waiting to have a mental health evaluation for your child because you're trying to understand where they are, if there's an app that can tell you what are the things that we can start be doing, how can we learn it, what are the things to look for, and really tailors that. If you have a child that needs speech pathology and really needs one-on-one support, but the school system can't afford it, how do you deal with that? If you've got aging parents who are stubborn and won't take their medicines and aren't taking care of themselves, how do you, fit that into your day? And so what you start to see is some of these funds are talking about the future of work, the future of play, and the future of care. And those become these very broad topics. What I ask about play, and to highlight, so I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Games for Change, which is a global nonprofit that think of the gaming industry for good. And the analogy I tell people is, if you think of Duolingo, it's a game. It's a very, very, very successful game. And so adult learning has gone from a 2D environment to a digital, often immersive environment. And so, and by the way, Carnegie Mellon has driven a lot of that through its Center for Technology and Excellence that Drew Davidson runs. And so we've seen, lots of amazing businesses coming out of that and in this space. And so women, in this creative space, and again, it's this merging of television, of movies, of commercials, short form video on the internet, as well as kind of the gaming world, and trying to understand and harness artificial intelligence. All technology can be good or bad. Who will be the gatekeepers, and who are the ones that will come up with the real practical ideas that impact people and family and kids and parents? And so that's what I see as the kind of the big trend. Kind of just reminds me, at the company we had in Pittsburgh, we had a woman who worked second shift. Her husband was a contractor. She was able to work and give health benefits for their family. So she was the responsible one that was looking out for their family and their family's health while the husband was doing his contracting stuff. And not to diminish that, but she was the one that's great, but we need to have health care, particularly for our kids. And so it's where is the responsibility in the family, and who are the ones that are looking for those opportunities?
Sounds like there's a lot of transformation coming both in the women-led ventures, but also in who might be investing in them. So that's very exciting. I can't wait to see what the next decade has in store for us. Evan, we had one follow-up question for you, and I know we touched a little bit on this already, but specifically, what role can male allies play in opening doors for women entrepreneurs over the next, 5 to 10 years?
So it comes in a lot of ways. First, I think would be highlighting and platforming these successful both fund managers and women, both online, in conferences and meetings, and in conversations with people. So I often talk about, there's a company called Parcel Health in Pittsburgh, young woman who's a pharmacist who said, what happens to those medicine bottles, those plastic bottles you get? They go to landfill. This wasn't like, there's no AI here. It was just, she developed a compostable medicine bottle. Now she needs, and we, the 412 fund, made an investment and made a lot of introductions to help them scale and understand and get into introductions to whether it's Giant Eagle or the big pharmacy benefit managers or even Mark Cuban's Cost Plus. And so those introductions to potential customers, to suppliers, to help those businesses become instrumental. Because when you try to go in cold in almost any situation, it is very, very difficult to get through the door. But a warm introduction will help a founder, will help a fund manager, will help a company more than you ever know. And so I think the biggest thing I think that male allies can do is use your platform. I talk about it. I use my white male privilege literally every chance I can to take down the patriarchy, smash misogyny, and support women in everything we do.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for all of your support. And we did have a question. I'm going to go a little off script here. We had a question come in through the chat, and it touched on what Maryam was talking about a little while ago. And it's talking about the generational wealth transfer that's going to be happening between the baby boomers and Gen X and the millennials over the next 10 or 20 years. And so the question was, how do we build networks for women to get more knowledgeable and comfortable participating in early stage investing?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that one.
Yeah,
I'm happy to start. I think there's sort of two areas that I would sort of focus on here. One is kind of going back to building the confidence, that sort of getting the education, learning how the venture industry works. And I'm going to do a quick plug actually for a program that Venture Forward leads called VC University. And our whole goal with building this program was to just democratize access to like venture education and helping anyone who wants to learn, whether you want to be an investor or you're a founder who wants to learn how an investor thinks, to learn things about like how do you diligence startups, how do you source startups, how do you read term sheets, how do you build cap tables, how do waterfalls work, and just sort of everything that goes with that. So I think there's sort of this just educational and bridging the gap of what has been a very opaque industry where a lot of this information was just in the heads and minds of a few people and a few demographics across the country, but making that available to everyone. So I think there's that piece. And then I think there are a lot of great networks that are both national and local that have popped up that are supporting women entrepreneurs and women investors. There are communities that have local chapters. So one that really I think rises to the top for me is an organization called All Raise. They've done a phenomenal job of building support resources, community for female entrepreneurs and investors. There are other organizations like ASTIA. There's Female Founders Fund. So I think there are a lot of groups in today's world that I would encourage anyone that's sort of trying to get more knowledge and just get more comfortable with early stage investing to build networks there. And maybe you don't want to go it alone, but maybe join an angel group, maybe syndicate with other investors, just so you don't feel like you're out there sort of doing this on your own. And just know you're going to make mistakes, like venture investing, angel investing. You're very likely to lose your money in this business. So I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I think the goal here, right, is to support the question actually as it was initially asked, which is this generational shift in wealth and sort of going to support more of these types of companies. The hope is that a few of these are going to be hugely successful and generate that wealth that is going to be more dispersed across more of the country.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in on that. It's part of the angel syndicate that we built, 45% of which are women. Most people who come to the group have never written an angel investing check, and there's a lot of education. We send people to VC University actually quite frequently. Groups like Class Rebel, which teach people, really the dynamics of venture funding, et cetera. I think also on an individual basis, when we think about money and the relationship to money and generational wealth, where generational wealth really starts to build is, most people don't have inherited wealth. Most people build wealth through things like homeownership, retirement funds, and entrepreneurship. And I think one of the best ways you can do that is you can, even as you join a startup, right, make sure that you're looking at your equity. When I first joined my first startup, I didn't understand the economics of equity until it became a real thing, right? And so I was all focused on the cash. The actual wealth comes from the equity, right? The ownership. Same thing happens when if you're going into a company, but the same thing also happens for investors with carried interest. It's not really necessarily your base salary. It's the interest that you start to build off of the profit of the funds, which is a very long cycle. So really just understanding about, like, where the wealth opportunities are and positioning yourself there is pretty critical as well.
The other thing I would add, Melissa, is that a lot of young people that I talk to, they care about the future, what's going to happen to our planet. They care about climate change. They care about equity. They care about healthy food systems. And so for parents or grandparents that have money that are thinking about investing, an important way to kind of engage your kids in this process is to make them part of this investment journey and start to look for companies that meet the things that they care about. And so if they care deeply about climate change, it's like, hey, why don't we together investigate this, look at stuff, and let's pick out a couple companies in this space that, we can learn together, but I know it's something that is passionate to you. And so, with this inherited wealth and the transfer of wealth, engaging your kids early in the process and letting them be part of the decision maker rather than a fait accompli, like, here's my financial statement, look at all these great things we did. It's like, no, let's talk about who are doing really creative, innovative things. And again, whether it's taking plastics out of the ocean, whether it's, again, getting antibiotics out of food, whether it's sustainable and circular fashion and furniture cycles. So we're just not putting more stuff into landfills. These are the conversations that I'm having with young people every day, and they're looking for their peers who are coming up with solutions in this space.
I want to thank you all. We're coming up on time, unfortunately. I've learned so much from you. As Maryam said, I think we're shedding some light on a very opaque industry. And it's so great to learn about how we as alumni can help support women entrepreneurs and women-led ventures. So I appreciate all of your time and insights today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Laura so that she can wrap it up for us. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to just echo Melissa's comments. I thought this was an incredibly engaging conversation. I think one of the things you mentioned, Maryam, at the beginning, 60% of deals are through existing networks, definitely caught my attention, and hence I wrote it down. I think it was incredibly informative, and I was really happy to see a lot of the engagement taking place through the chat. Thank you all so much for your time. I will mention one other piece, and it's something that Evan actually mentioned a couple of times, are just generally ways to access networks and resources for anyone who's with us here today through Carnegie Mellon. University-wide, there are a number of avenues that you can take. Evan mentioned a few in particular, the Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship. There are a number of suite of things you can access through Tepper's executive education. So just that is something that I would encourage everyone to navigate here at CMU. It is an area where clearly we have a strength. So I thank you all for the panelists for mentioning that. Again, thank everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. And this webinar will be posted soon to the website so that hopefully if you would like to catch any of the conversation again, you can do that at your own time. And that's all we have. Thank you, everyone.